Let's go. I'm ready.
Hey guys, hope you're all doing well. So today I'm going to make a prediction. It's going to be a pretty dark prediction, but I'm going to predict what will kill the most people in the next 100 years. To make this prediction, I'm going to use the previous 100 years. Put simply, it's going to be either religicide, politicide, or famine. So what tends to kill most people is usually other people, right? This is mainly through politicide, religicide, and genocide. So basically one group of people killing another group of people. In most instances, the smaller group of people gets wiped out. The smaller group of people usually tends to be different in some way. So for the Jewish people, it was because they didn't have a land of their own, and a lot of socialist and Marxist thought led to the racial ideas of a land and a people and being a strong people and all that sort of deal. Which is what Hitler and Nietzsche and all that sort of latched onto. They weren't considered a true proper strong people because they never really had land of their own. Well, they did, but they got conquered, like a ton of it by Islam and that sort of deal. So that would be your genocides, right? Your racial genocides, whether they be Jewish or Tutsi, Hutu, and all that sort of thing. Even though Tutsi, Hutu was kind of more of a politicide because those people shared a lot of roots. They were like a very similar people, but they were like pushed together into like a confined space. That's very similar to basically, well, it's all these ideas are kind of similar, right? Genocide, politicide, and religicide. Politicide tends to be Marxist politics and socialist politics playing off each other. So that would be your Maoist mass starvation and your Maoist persecution of capitalist people and landowners and that sort of deal. That would be your Soviet Union persecution of kulaks and capitalists and critics of, communist state. So that would be your politicides. And like 9 times out of 10, that type of politicide, especially when it's like socialist and communist, usually leads to bad economic policies, which usually leads to famine. So you can argue that it's a deliberate man-made created famine. And a lot of the leaders know it too. Like, famine is a method often used by African dictators to just starve and control and destroy the will of their people, so they're easier to control. So that would be your politicides, right? And finally, you have your religious sides. Yeah. Your religious side is basically your deliberate targeting of a religious group for basically extermination. So either you'll kill or convert. In the last 100 years, the worst culprit for that has, without a doubt, been Islam. A lot of people don't want to talk about it, especially Islamic people, but it has been Islam, without a doubt. Not only have they spawned the top 10 terrorist groups currently, which deliberately, politically, and religiously target civilians, like directly target civilians, which in itself is a war crime. They do it for the express purpose to terrorize and convert. Even within their societies, like Islamic theocracies, they apply a tax to non-believers, right? The jizya. And that is also another sort of path of least resistance attempt to convert. In addition to that, they've got the Armenian, Greek, and Assyrian genocides on their hands, basically where they killed or converted a bunch of like other ethnic groups, sure, but the ethnic part is not the issue. The issue is the not being Islamic part. It is a horrible violent religion, and obviously a ton of it because of the Jews criticizing Muhammad, basically. Muhammad responded with narcissistic reprisal to direct criticism and shaming of his power, possibly because he was illiterate at the time and the Jews weren't. But yeah, we're splitting hairs here. He hated Jews, and as a result, Islam put in all their hadiths and Quran to deliberately target Jews. There'll come a time where Jews and hide behind trees and rocks, and the trees and rocks will cry out, "There's a Jew behind me, come and kill him." So basically it is religious targeting of Jewish individuals. So that's very different to the idea of genocide and politicide, even though it's hard to draw the line between politicide and religious side with Islam because it has no separation of church and state. It is a political ideology and a religion rolled into one. But that would be your instance of religious side. You've seen that also in places where Islam has been directly involved with wars. So that would be your Pakistan, India type areas where, yeah, they've continued to, do their behaviour. You've also got the Bangladeshi deliberate targeting of civilians, and you've also got the Pakistani invasions during the Kashmir Wars, where they deliberately target civilians. Like, Islam deliberately targets civilians, either atheists or Christians, and that directly is religicide. You could argue that it's politicide because they target them with the goal of transforming their demographic into majority Islamic, and obviously from there, because Islam basically sucks, it develops like a downward purity spiral where you can never be pure enough for Islam. It's disgust related. It's a lot of it has to do with violence and purity, and as a result, the people that get into power are the people who abuse this the most. And then you get sort of radicals leading the religion. You can see this in Iran, you can see this in Hamas, Hezbollah, but basically the whole lot of it, like most Islamic theocracies, even like Erdogan in Turkey, and that's like in spite of Turkey kind of being atheist, like after the Armenian genocide with the Young Turks and all that sort of thing. with Ataturk, they kind of developed a more atheist outlook rather than Islamic theocratic outlook. But yeah, that would be your religious sides. So my predictions for the 3 biggest killers of humans in the next 100 years. Okay, number 1, a nuclear war triggered directly by Islam's politicide, mainly Iran and Israel conflict area. Okay, so Iran's been obviously proxy warring with Israel for forever. It's doing this sort of bully, weak, cry bully sort of tactic where it's just trying to proxy destroy Israel. Basically because it can't with hard power. Every time they've had a war with Israel, Israel's beat the fucking shit out of them. So they've essentially tried to infiltrate it, corrupt it, and destroy it from within with proxy and guerrilla warfare. The most recent one is obviously October 7 within Gaza and the West Bank, where they have basically funded Hamas to act as a guerrilla force within Israel. Technically, Israel left Gaza, but they're still kind of conjoined, right? And that's been going for ages. There was a year there where it was basically the Hamas equivalent of the time. They were just attacking civilians pretty much non-stop. Like 1 year, there was like a child suicide bombing, i.e. using children to suicide bomb. Every week. There was one every week for like a year. Like, it was that bad. And like, everyone criticizes Israel for being like a police state and setting up checkpoints and all that sort of thing. They point to that as being one of the necessary steps in a genocide, and it is if you look at the TLOU2 Rwandan genocide. One of the steps there during that genocide was they would literally set up checkpoints and ask you for your papers and basically out you as your political group because they couldn't tell otherwise, basically. So yeah, so that's going to be the next one. It's going to be nuclear war triggered by politicide of nuclear war triggered by religious side from Iran-Israel conflict. That's probably going to be one of them. The next is going to be politicide. It's going to be the socialist/globalist European Union and all the people there fully implementing socialism into a global economy. As a result of that, the global economy is going to fucking fail and crash. And then you're going to see a bunch of the third world and a portion of the second and first world just starve as a result of that. You've already seen it a little bit in Venezuela. Like, there's been sort of mass starving there. China's starting to collapse a bit, but that's more due to demographic than it is, directly to communism, although communism certainly doesn't help with, like, global markets and that sort of deal. But what's going to happen is this whole silly push for centralized globalist control of politics, markets, humans, globally, is going to function essentially how communism functioned in both the Soviet Union and China. And it's going to lead to central control of markets. As a result of that, markets not going to be able to adjust. Everything's going to inflate and fail. Then they're going to do price fixing. The price fixing is going to fail. It's going to lead to massive shortages. Basically, everything's going to crash from there. So that would be my number 2 pick for what's going to kill the most humans in the next 100 years. I'm assuming the globalists are going to be able to implement this at some point, but basically that's where they're headed if they succeed. Alright, my third prediction for what's going to kill the most people in the next 100 years is going to be basically a backlash to the first two. Since Islam, and like the Iran and Israel war, everyone's going to have a backlash against Islam eventually. Everyone's going to see how stupid it is and how it just leads to constant conflict and is basically really horrible. So people are going to eventually say that. Not to mention all the, the whole stoning women to death and child marriage and, genociding Jews because the book told you so, and
Find where they're hiding.
yeah, it's fucked. It's absolutely horrible. But there's going to be a backlash to that, basically. So people don't forget things, and as a result of them very likely going to trigger a nuclear war between Iran and Israel. Iran constantly ganging up on Israel with all its proxies and neighbours. Israel may eventually be pushed to the point where they have to use a nuclear weapon to maintain Israel, and that will trigger Iran's nuclear response, assuming they're not, absolutely nuclearly blitzkrieged and completely wiped out with the first blow, which is, it's likely. Look, they're not a very effective force. Islamic soldiers never are. That's why they need to resort to these sorts of tactics like guerrilla war, kidnapping, all that sort of deal. And basically, even then, they're not very good at it. The entire First World funded them because of this idea that Islam is a religion of peace, and everyone just completely overlooked how we were just funding Hamas to, basically turn Gaza into one big human shield bunker. And that happened for 10 years. So even then, they're not good at it by themselves. It's not like they're, Australia in World War II, terrific, guerrilla jungle fighters or anything like that. No, we've funded them. The biggest thing you can compliment about Islam is their commitment to it. Even though they're not very good, tactically, strategically, all that sort of deal, they will fight to the literal death. And since Islam's the second biggest religion in the world, that's a lot of people straight up fighting to the death, right? Eventually there's going to be a backlash against that, because everyone's going to say Islam's pretty responsible for, a lot of the current worst things in the world, and they're doing it deliberately in order to try and spread Islam. It's sort of acting like a massive sort of intellectual infection of the human race at the moment. Its cultural practices are absolutely fucking horrible. There's no argument about that. Not all cultures are equal. I'm not saying anything about Arabs. I'm not saying, they're racially inferior. They're not. People are people. But if you're raised in a culture where a cultural practice is a group of men will bury a woman up to her chest in dirt and then hit her with large stones until she dies, and then even then they may just there was a horrible video of one. It wasn't recently, but if you guys have ever seen a stoning, it is absolutely savage, absolutely brutal, right? They basically hit her with stones, and when she was still alive and buried under these massive chunks of concrete, they set her on fire for no fucking reason, right? And that's a standard thing within Islam. Not long ago, there was a man in Pakistan that was accused of criticizing the Quran, and a crowd gathered around him, beat him, set him on fire. It's It's like a purity thing, right? They respond with disgust to any criticism of the Quran or whatever. And whenever they reach a critical mass in a society, that shit becomes normal. And it's just this horrible sort of cultural practice, right? And even then, even though they're not good at, governing or societies or anything like that, it still manages to maintain this level of stability, even though it's absolutely fucking horrible, right? Because of that, they've created countries sort of like Iran that had their, massive Islamic revolution, and they've tied their cultural identity to it. And as a result of that, all the genocidal ideas within the Quran, especially towards Jews, has sort of come along with it. Like, it's a absolutely fucking horrible culture. Terrible economically and everything as well. But the idea is, people are eventually going to see what it is. And they will very likely, particularly if it leads to a nuclear conflict, just simply because, Islamic people don't back down even though their ideas are shit and genocidal, people will eventually look at Islam as a horrible, destructive force, at which point there very likely could be a politicide against Islamic people, and Islamic people are like a third of the world's population. So it's like the second biggest religion. The largest is Christianity, for obvious reasons, because Christianity is incredibly stable and all that sort of deal. So number 3 is going to be a politicide, religicide against Islamic people. That would be my prediction for number 3. All of these can be avoided. So basically in every genocide, politicide, religicide, right? It's all about voiding the individual rights of people. If we were somehow able to... It becomes more obvious politically whenever you are doing that, right? It became obvious during the COVID crisis when everyone's right to medical autonomy, the idea of their medical consent being breached. For the longest time within medicine, that was... medical consent was the gold standard, right? You could theoretically not consent to any medical procedure up to and including it leading to your death. And the globalists kind of voided that taboo with the whole mandatory vaccination thing during COVID. And everyone fucking hated it immediately, and there were multiple 500,000 to 1 million person marches, just at least in Australia that was the case, right? Everyone immediately knew what it was and wasn't going to go along with it. We need something like that globally, where we have a sort of like an American Bill of Rights, but an American Bill of Rights globally. Because a lot of the ways that individuals' rights are voided is through socialism, social control, these collectivist ideologies. Like Islam, socialism, communism, that sort of deal. The idea that you will be forced by the state to do something theoretically in the greater good, right? That sort of idea. In order to just make that significantly more difficult, it would be a good idea to create a global Bill of Rights. And have that global Bill of Rights mimic something like the American Bill of Rights, right? Where you have right to say whatever you want, your right to freedom of movement, all that sort of deal. You implement that country by country, not globally. Because if you implement that globally, obviously you're going to have problems with mass immigration everywhere to the more wealthy areas. Then they're going to form slums and fucking sort of collapse, right? But that would be how you would avoid those 3 potential mass killings of people, right? The religious side of Islam, the nuclear war triggered by the politicized and religious side of Islam and the mass starvation collectively implemented through the politicized by globalists with like socialist sort of intentions, sort of totalitarian intentions. A global Bill of Rights that is the same, that's applied as a standard, based on sort of like the Christian Bible, I guess, where it is, not corrupted. The problem is, the initial implementation. It's extremely subject to a lot of corruption, especially through politicians and current political establishments and current dictators in place. But that would be how you would prevent these mass killings of people. A global Bill of Rights based on the American-style Bill of Rights. That would be how you would prevent it. Like, and because politics and everything, it always attracts the worst people. It always attracts like the narcissistic people who think they know better, the sociopathic people that think they know better, even psychopathic people like seeking to gain power. And the easiest thing to do in politics is to usually scapegoat a minority, and that applies even in supposedly equal societies, or societies that strive for utopia of equality. Like that applies even in them. Like, for example, the Soviet Union, the capitalists and the kulaks got scapegoated. In Maoist China, the landowners and the capitalists got scapegoated. Like, it's absolutely fucking horrible. The best way to do that is to just start the negotiation off right at the beginning with the Bill of Rights and have these rights that everyone agrees on that can't be voided even by government. Like, freedom of speech is obviously a big one, even though they're trying to transgress a lot on it at the moment with all this hate speech legislation and criticism of Islam and blasphemy laws and shit. And the idea of, permitted protest in the UK, like, all of it's fucked. But, like, the negotiation should start there. It should never be pitched that you just, scapegoat people and just void all their rights for convenience. And that just happens so much in politics, and it's happened in basically all these, mass killings of people. Like, the individual rights of people are just, straight up voided. That's fucking horrible. So, Global Bill of Rights would minimise that. At least start the negotiation there, that you can't, void individual people's rights. I think that would probably be the way to go about it. And at least cut down the risk of it. But even then, you've got these conflicting ideologies like Islam that they're fucking horrible, and they don't agree on things, and they have cultural practices that are fucking absolutely horrible, like, child marriage and killing apostates and all that sort of thing. It's, those types of cultures, they'll have to be dealt with eventually. It's already on its way to, probably provoking a nuclear war between Iran and Israel. Just because of itself. But yeah,